Greetings from my Confession Story YouTube account. This is the story of a moment in my life that changed everything, and it all started on a hot summer's morning in Virginia. I never even thought I would leave my family and my small, familiar world, but life always surprises us. Please subscribe to my channel so I can continue to bring you more fascinating, true stories like this one, and don't forget to watch this video through to the end and like it, because it is going to be incredibly interesting. The air was hot, and I could feel my scarf sticking to my neck as I stood outside the modest brick house. It was my first job in America, far from the dusty streets of Bala, where I had grown up. A seemingly ideal family of four needed a nanny, and I needed the job. It wasn't just about making money. It was also about demonstrating to my parents and siblings that I could live and prosper in a nation so different from my own. Please click the like button to show your support for the Jacobs family. I was 33, single, and fiercely independent, rare for a Jordanian woman like me, and I wanted to prove to my family that I could support myself. Sophia Jacobs, the wife, was beautiful and well-groomed. Then there was Ethan Jacobs, the husband, who was tall and had a natural charm that immediately put you at ease. She greeted me with a warm smile, her blonde hair neatly swept into a bun, and her voice was soft, but every word she spoke was deliberate, the way Americans often spoke as though they wanted you to know that every single word mattered. She was dressed in tailored blouses and designer heels that clicked against the marble floors of their large home. When I first met him, he didn't say much. He simply nodded courteously and gave me a cup of tea. His sandy brown hair curled slightly at the ends, and the laugh lines around his eyes revealed a guy who had experienced joy rather than just worry. I had never worked as a nanny before, but Sophia assured me that my experience as the oldest of 6 siblings would be more than enough to handle the job. She was kind, but I could tell she had high expectations. She handed me a thick binder full of rules, meal plans, daily routines, emergency numbers, and even instructions on how to fold laundry. The first few weeks were uneventful, with me waking up at 6 in the morning. Their children, Mia and Noah, were 3 and 5 years old, full of energy, questions, and insatiable curiosity. Make a breakfast pack for Mia's school lunch, and keep Noah occupied till he takes a nap. Storybooks, finger painting, and chasing Noah around the backyard occupied my days. At night, I would go to my tiny room in the basement, feeling both tired and satisfied. I didn't realize Ethan was observing me until one day, almost a month into my work. Noah leaned against the counter and murmured, "You're amazing with them," as I was seated on the kitchen floor cleaning up a mess he had produced with his juice box. Startled, I glanced up. "Oh, embarrassed," I said. "Thank you, sir." "Please call me Ethan," he said with a kind smile. I nodded, feeling the heat rise to my chest. She said it wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it, and that made me feel something I couldn't quite explain. Back home, men rarely spoke to women with such kindness unless they had a secret agenda. However, Ethan seemed different from that day on. He always asked if I had eaten lunch, offered to help carry groceries, and would linger in the kitchen while I was cooking. Sophia, on the other hand, was frequently away on business trips, leaving Ethan and me alone with the children. Ethan seemed to enjoy spending time with me, and his presence gave me comfort one evening as I was setting the dining table. He remarked in a gentle and considerate tone, "I'm tired of what I asked, confused, and tired of doing everything for everyone." I shrugged. "I'm accustomed to it. It's my work." Long after he had left the room, his words, "You shouldn't have to be," continued to reverberate. It was odd to hear someone recognize my efforts, but Ethan's remarks gave me a sense of recognition and appreciation. In my society, women were supposed to labor tirelessly without inquiry or expectation of compensation. Naturally, I made an effort to ignore it. I reminded myself of my identity and values. No matter how nice or attractive my employer was, I was a Muslim woman bound by my faith and traditions, and there were boundaries I could never cross. However, as the summer days progressed, a shift occurred, leading to a blurring of the boundaries. At first, it was harmless enough, jokes, glances, and casual conversations that lasted a little longer than necessary, but I knew deep down that I was going too far. I frequently imagined my mother's voice, firm and unforgiving. Remember, Zara, I had always been proud of my ability to resist modern temptations. But Ethan was different. This world will seduce you, but you must remain loyal to yourself. I made an effort to remind myself of my religion, my convictions, and the life I had left behind in Jordan. But as the days passed, I found it more and more difficult to ignore our developing bond. The temptation was becoming too strong to resist. I had always taken pride in my ability to maintain self-control and resist the temptations of the modern world. But Ethan was different. One rainy evening, when the kids were asleep and the house was silent except for the gentle sound of rain hitting the windows, I was cleaning up in the kitchen after dinner when Ethan came in and asked for assistance. I said, "No, it's okay, I'm almost done," but he stayed. The air was thick with unspoken words as we worked in quiet for a time until Ethan eventually broke the ice. "Are you ever homesick?" he inquired daily. "I came here for a reason," I confessed, but he remarked in a tone of awe, "You've sacrificed so much." "Why do you say that?" I stared at him in surprise. "Because it's uncommon," he added, "to put everyone else before yourself and to never complain." His remark surprised me, as no one, not even at home, had ever spoken to me in such a manner. I felt a strange mixture of shame and thankfulness, as if I were betraying something significant by listening. I dismissed the compliment and responded, "It's nothing special. It's to me," he said, looking directly into my eyes. Something changed between us in that moment. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a connection, a spark, a silent understanding of something neither of us dared to express out loud. That night, I went to bed with a heavy heart, torn between my faith and the feelings I couldn't ignore. I prayed for strength, clarity, and the courage to stay on the right path. But deep down I knew my life was about to change in ways I never imagined. I believed I could maintain a professional demeanor, and that the tenuous connection I shared with Ethan would fade away like a fleeting cloud. However, life rarely goes as planned. Every day brought new, seemingly insignificant moments that chipped away at the wall I had built around my heart. Sophia's absences became a routine. She was always off to conferences in New York, business meetings in Chicago, or overnight stays at opulent hotels I had only seen in magazines. In the everyday tumult of raising Mia and Noah, Ethan took on the role of the unwavering parent, and I joined him. He was loved by the kids. During story time, Mia would climb onto his lap with her tiny hands gripping his shirt while Noah followed him everywhere like a shadow, imitating his every move. As I watched them together, I noticed a gentle and unguarded Ethan, and it sparked something inside of me that I couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the living room, Ethan entered with a box. He placed it on the coffee table and said, "I thought you might like this." "What is it?" Wiping my hands on my apron, I inquired. A collection of cookbooks was inside the package when he opened it. "You've been experimenting with new recipes recently, so I thought this may motivate you." I looked at him in awe. It wasn't just the present. It was the idea behind it. No one had ever noticed or even valued the small things I did. Even after the kids had gone to sleep, Ethan and I found ourselves back in the kitchen. It had become a sort of ritual, those quiet moments after the day's chaos. And I was cleaning the counters when he said, "Thank you," my voice catching in my throat. "It's nothing," he replied, but the way he looked at me said otherwise. "Zara, you put in too much work," he added. Startled, I glanced up. "It's what I do." "You do more than your job. You care. You love these kids," he remarked, shaking his head. I murmured, attempting to escape his eyes. "They're easy to love, like they're your own." "Are you?" he said quietly. The words lingered between us. "Me? You?" And weighty. Unsure of how to react, I froze. Zara started, but he halted himself. "I apologize. It wasn't the right thing to say." I said, "No, it's okay." Despite the fact that it wasn't, we stood there in silence with the weight of his words bearing down on us. I wanted to correct him, telling him that I was difficult to love, complicated and flawed, and that I was subject to rules he would never comprehend, but I chose to remain silent. The days went very quickly. I made an effort to tell myself that nothing had changed, but I knew in my heart that things had altered. The way Ethan's eyes wrinkled when he smiled, the way he hummed softly while doing the dishes, and the way he always made sure the kids said thank you and please were all signs that he was everywhere. He wasn't just kind, though. He was thoughtful in a way that felt unique and uncommon. One afternoon, while I was pushing Mia on the swing in the backyard, Ethan came out with a tray of iced tea. "I thought you might need a break," he said, passing me a glass. I accepted it with gratitude and replied, "Thank you." Watching the children play, we sat on the front steps. "Do you ever consider the possible outcomes of your life?" Ethan asked abruptly. Startled, I asked him, "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you hadn't come here, you would have stayed in Bala." I stopped and gave it some thought. I acknowledged that I had a cause for coming here. "Have you discovered it?" His gaze remained fixed on me during his inquiry. I was uncertain about how to respond. At times, my answer was affirmative, and at other times, it was nuanced. Ethan nodded, as though he realized that we are often taken by surprise in life. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my family back home, about my mother's prayers, and about my father's stern warnings to stay true to your faith. "It does," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, and for a moment we sat there in silence, the air between us heavy with unspoken thoughts. I wanted to tell him how much his kindness meant to me, how his presence had become a comfort in a world that often felt lonely and unfamiliar. "Remember who you are." I wanted to think I was still the same girl who proudly donned her scarf and prayed 5 times a day, but I was actually changing, and I was afraid of it. "Zara," I didn't look up when he continued. I tried to avoid Ethan as much as possible the next morning by keeping myself busy with chores, keeping my head down, and keeping my mind focused. However, by the afternoon, it was hard to escape him, and he found me in the laundry room, going through a pile of clothing. "Sure, how are you?" I hurriedly answered, "I'm fine," but he didn't believe me. "Please don't shut me out," he urged, taking a step closer. "I understand that I've crossed a boundary, but it's not about you," I said, finally glancing at him. "It's about myself, my faith, and my views." He answered, "I understand," but I could tell by the expression in his eyes that he didn't really get it. "Could he?" I started to say, "I can't," but the words stuck in my throat. "This is not something I can accomplish." With a regretful expression on his face, Ethan nodded slowly. "Zara, I apologize. I never intended to cause you any discomfort." "That's the issue," I added hastily. "You didn't." The weight of everything unsaid between us caused us to stand in quiet for a while until he eventually murmured, "I'll give you space." I trembled as I said, "Thank you." And as he walked out of the room, I experienced a surge of relief accompanied by an unidentified anguish. Even though I knew I was doing morally, it didn't make things any simpler that evening. I never prayed as fervently as I did now. As I sat on the floor, tears flowing down my cheeks, I prayed for strength, direction, and the courage to be true to myself. It dawned on me that I wasn't just fighting temptation. I was fighting a part of myself that I no longer recognized. The days following our conversation in the laundry room were stressful but doable. Ethan fulfilled his pledge to give me space, and I made every effort to concentrate on my work. I threw myself into caring for Mia and Noah, organizing baking and craft projects that kept us occupied from dawn until nightfall. But even with my hands busy, my thoughts kept returning to him. Ethan remained friendly, almost aloof, and I told myself that this was the wisest course of action. It was a Friday evening shortly after sunset when the rain began and the thunder rumbled, shaking the windows and startling Noah, who clung to my leg as I cleared the dinner table. For a brief period, we managed to maintain the illusion that nothing had occurred and the discussion in the laundry room was merely an instance of weakness. It nearly worked, though. I gathered Noah in my arms and reassured him not to worry. "It's only a slight sound. All right, let me get you ready for bed." As the rain continued to fall outside, I brought Noah upstairs and read him his favorite bedtime tale. By the time both children were sleeping, the storm had intensified, the wind was howling, and the house felt abnormally peaceful despite the mayhem outside. Ethan was in the kitchen, staring out the window with a glass of wine in his hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and the soft kitchen light accentuated the sharp lines of his jaw. He appeared to be deep in thought, and I paused in the doorway, uncertain whether to interrupt. I had expected to find him downstairs, where he usually sat on the couch. "You not a wine drinker? You?" He seemed to sense my presence as he inquired without looking back. "It's against my beliefs," I said as I stepped into the room. He nodded and turned to face me at last. "That's what I assumed. You're unique. What's wrong with that?" He murmured gently, "It's refreshing," as I queried with a tiny smile tugging at my lips. "Not at all." The room was tense, and I could feel his eyes on me as I worked. "Zara?" I busied myself cleaning the countertops, trying to ignore how his comments made my heart race. After a lengthy pause, he murmured, "Yes," and I answered without raising my head. "Can we have a conversation?" I turned away from the wiping and asked him, "What about us?" His voice was low as he said, "Ethan, there is no us." I shook my head, feeling my heart race. "So why am I unable to get you off my mind?" I started to say, "Please, Ethan, step closer," but he cut me off. "I am aware that it is incorrect. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it," he added in a shaky voice. He paused, running a hand through his hair, "And I see you every day taking care of my children and making our place seem like home. You're unlike anyone I've ever met." My throat tightened with each breath. I tried to dismiss what he said, telling myself that I didn't want to hear it, but hearing it out made it difficult to ignore what was occurring between us. "You're married. You have a family," I uttered, barely audible above a whisper. "Ethan," he murmured, his eyes brimming with anguish. "I understand, but Sophia is constantly absent and occupied, and when she's around, it feels as though we are complete strangers." "Ethan," I whispered again, but this time it wasn't a request for him to stop. Rather, it was a surrender. I stood for frozen, caught between the part of me that knew this was wrong and the part that yearned to feel seen, cherished, and wanted. "You're the only one who makes me feel—" He stopped again, as if the words were too difficult to say. His hand moved down to my waist, drawing me in closer, and I felt myself melting into him as he filled the gap between us. His lips found mine in a delicate kiss at first, but as we both gave in to the emotions we had been battling for so long, the kiss grew deeper. We didn't stop at a kiss that night while the storm raged outside. Instead, we crossed a line that we would never be able to uncross. He was the only thing left, and I forgot about Sophia, the kids, my faith, and my family. His touch ignited a fire within me that I was unaware existed, and he took me upstairs to his bedroom. It was nothing like what I'd imagined back home, where intimacy was never discussed, but only whispered about behind closed doors. But with Ethan, it was different. He was patient, passionate, and attentive, making me feel things I never thought possible. I let him undress me, his hands touching every part of my body as if I were something sacred in his arms. I felt genuinely wanted for the first time in my life. After it was finished, we lay entangled together while the rain pounded on the windows. I avoided looking at Ethan because I felt the weight of what we had done pressing down on me. But when he caught my eye and gave me a small, knowing smile, I couldn't help but feel a range of emotions I wasn't ready to face. I knew I should feel guilty, ashamed, even disgusted with myself. But instead I felt a strange peace, as though I had finally found the missing piece of myself. I had the same surge of exhilaration as the previous evening, but it continued. Every time I promised myself it would be the last, it never was. Over the course of the following few weeks, we found ourselves snatching moments whenever we could, whether it was a short embrace behind closed doors, a hushed discussion in the kitchen after the kids had gone to sleep, or a lingering touch as we passed in the hallway. For a while, I let myself believe that we could keep this going, that we could live in our own little world without anyone else knowing. But I knew deep down that it couldn't last, and that when our bubble finally burst, it would bring nothing but destruction. Ethan became my addiction, and I couldn't resist him. He made me forget everything, my faith, my upbringing, and the values I had once held so dear. Ethan and I were cautious but careless, making time for each other whenever Sophia wasn't home, when the kids were asleep or the house was empty. I told myself that every time we touched, it would be the last, but it never was. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments, and whispered promises that filled my days with both joy and fear. While I was Zara, the loyal nanny who read bedtime stories, prepared meals, and smiled warmly at Mia and Noah, I felt as though I was living two lives. At night, when everything was quiet and the house was dark,